He was dying, and the ambulance couldn't reach him. That's how it begins. Not with siren, not with scream, but with blocked road and crown that did belong. Mr. Green, retired firefighter, decorated war veteran, and the kind of neighbor who shoveled snow for others before doing his own, collapsed on his front porch just after sunrise. His hand clutched his chest, his breathing turned into short, panicked gasps. His wife, Janet, barefoot and trembling, dialed 911 with hands that couldn't stop shaking, her voice cracked with desperation, begging the dispatcher for help. The dispatcher said an ambulance was on the way, but it never arrived, not where it needed to, because it couldn't. The something inhuman, something grotesque had been allowed to bloom in the middle of Fire Lane, white party tents, DJ booths, inflatable arches, folding chairs lined up like bleachers awaiting an Olympic spectacle, and balloon arch overhead that screamed in all caps, "Happy Sweet 16 Madison, Suburban Street, dressed up like Lobud. Music festival, each streamer another barrier to survival." At the center of it all stood Karen, tiara, glitter sash, clipboard. A queen without a crown, so she made one out of entitlement. She wasn't just hosting party, she was commanding blockade. She stood firm at the intersection of delusion and disregard, waving at her guests and shouting orders like parade marshal while the Fire Lane, clearly painted in yellow, clearly meant to be free at all times, was converted into her own private venue. When the sirens echoed, Karen didn't panic. She scoffed like they were early. World could wait until her daughter finished blowing out candles. The ambulance pulled up and halted at the edge of the chaos. The paramedics jumped out and ran, tripping over coolers, dodging balloon clusters, pushing past teenagers taking selfies. One stumbled over an ice bucket with champagne bottles. Another was stopped by party guests holding clipboard, asking if they were on the list. Nearby, Janet Green screamed, her voice cracking against the wall of pop music echoing down the street. She waved both arms, screaming, "Someone, anyone to help!" Her face, caught on multiple doorbell cameras, was the moment the story fractured. It was fear, it was fury. It was love weaponized by desperation. Karen, arms crossed, marched toward the paramedics, shouting about how they were stepping on the balloon path. Yes, balloon path. That's what she said. That was her concern. Not the man dying 70 feet away. Not the gurney bouncing between tables. Not the minutes slipping by like sand through broken glass. No, it was the sanctity of party aesthetic. That exact moment, that exact framing was caught on neighbor's phone, blocking first responders with clipboard demanding to see permits. It would go viral within 24 hours. But for now, the neighborhood held its breath. I watched it unfold from across the street. I just turned off my lawnmower when I saw the flashing lights and the frozen ambulance. I didn't believe it at first. It felt wrong, like scene from dark comedy, except no one was laughing. You'd think a neighborhood where home meetings last longer than elections, where trash bin violations get written up with the rage of war crimes, anyone would have said something, but Karen wasn't someone. She was that someone. The woman who once fined a neighbor for Halloween decorations that went up 2 days early, who insisted lawns be color coordinated, who demanded seasonal wreaths match Ho-approved palettes. She wasn't elected Ho president. She didn't need to be. She was louder, sharper. She outpapered them all with fake permits and laminated notices taped to stop signs. That morning, her daughter Madison was turning 16, and Karen, in all her suburban, declared the Fire Lane the perfect place for party. No one dared challenge her until the sirens came. I remember dropping the mower handle. My fingers trembled. Something fell off. I ran toward the sidewalk and saw a paramedic arguing with Karen. She was saying things like, "This is paid event, and I don't see your event pass." I swear I saw one EMT's jaw literally clench as he tried to keep calm while holding defibrillator. Another firefighter arrived and began dragging folding table aside, only to be screamed at by teenage girl for ruining the lemonade aesthetic. These were real words, real people, in real time. And a real man, someone who once pulled children from burning houses, was lying on his porch turning gray while a woman in heels screamed about balloon integrity. Eventually they got through, but it cost them time that Mr. Green didn't have. Time stolen not by fate, not by traffic, but by ego dressed in glitter. By then the fire truck arrived. Or tried to, it got caught in the blockade. Rogue archway collapsed onto the hood, clustered helium balloons wrapped around its siren-like streamers on clown car. Then came the men in navy. The fire captain, no clipboard, no smile, just presence. Karen approached him like she always did. Fake grin, performative politeness, voice dripping with sugar and poison. "You're kind of blocking our exit photo line," she said. He didn't respond. He walked past her like she wasn't even real. More firefighters appeared. Neighbors began to step out, filming. Some tried to look concerned. Others hid laughter. It was surreal. I stood next to a guy who muttered, "She really blocked Fire Lane with popcorn car." I replied, "That cart might end her entire Ho career." We didn't know how right we were. Then the unmarked vehicle rolled in. The man who stepped out wore uniform unlike the others. The insignia shimmered under the morning sun. The fire chief. Not chief, the chief. Karen saw him and her entire posture changed. She tried to greet him, but he didn't even blink in her direction. He scanned the street like battlefield. Then came the words that would echo far beyond this block. Who the hell authorized private event on an emergency access lane? Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then silence. That was the beginning of her undoing. The fire chief didn't want apologies. He wanted paperwork, names, permits, answers. Karen tried. She mumbled. She deflected. She said it was just few tenths, then. There hasn't been an emergency here in decades. Her voice cracked. The authority in her tone evaporated. And then came the hammer. Would you like to explain that to the mayor? He asked. Her face paled, not because of guilt, but because of consequence. Around her, the music still blared. Fog machines still hissed its mist. Children still bounced in the castle. But the tone had shifted. Karen's voice no longer filled the air. It was replaced by the heavy silence of truth, the kind that doesn't need shouting, the kind that arrives like gabble. Mr. Green was eventually stabilized. Barely. He made it to the hospital. He would recover, but not without consequence. His wife wouldn't forget the delay, the fear, the realization that her husband might have died because women wanted matching napkins and balloon walkway. And Karen, she stood frozen. Her crown didn't fall. It cracked, splintered, turned invisible, no longer feared, no longer admired, just pitied. And that was just the beginning. Tanya didn't plan to change anything. She was the kind of neighbor who moved through life quietly, well-mannered, prompt with trash collection, the type who waved politely from her driveway but never lingered. Her house was clean, her lawn always trimmed. Her daughter, shy middle schooler, rode her bike without training wheels and always wore helmet. Tanya wasn't invisible, but she also wasn't seen, not really, not until her doorbell camera captured what would become the most damning footage in the history of their cul-de-sac. She hadn't even realized what she had until that evening when she sat down, her daughter asleep, and replayed the motion alert from earlier that day. Frame opened with Karen gesturing furiously at paramedics. The sound was muffled at first, but Tanya enhanced it. The phrase, "You're messing up the balloon path," was perfectly clear. The footage continued, and the chaos unfolded like bad sitcom crossed with procedural drama. Partygoers milling in confusion, responders hauling gear, Janet Green sobbing in the distance. Tanya's breath hitched when she saw the gurney being carried sideways through the chaos. She watched it twice, then 3 more times. By midnight, she had clipped the most critical parts and sent them to few neighbors. Trusted the ones who still replied to her holiday cards. By morning, the video was everywhere. Community Facebook groups, local subreddit threads, even the neighborhood WhatsApp group where Karen had once posted motivational quotes alongside home meeting reminders now bristled with screenshots and pixelated rage. Someone had added music to the clip, circus tune loop beneath Karen's tirade about permits and balloon aesthetics. It wasn't funny, it wasn't meant to be, but it was going viral. And Karen, always obsessed with being seen, was now famous for all the wrong reasons. Still, she could fix it. Her first move was damage control. She posted a carefully worded statement on the community bulletin board and duplicated it across her socials. It used phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and celebrating milestone moment. She wrote that she was deeply proud of her daughter's sweet 16 and asked for privacy and empathy during this challenging time. But empathy was in short supply. People flooded her comment sections with memes. Karen photoshopped into disaster movies, into medieval battlefields labeled Queen of the Fire Lane, and one particularly viral image of her holding her clipboard in front of an exploding fire truck. None of it was subtle. None of it forgettable. The situation escalated with surgical precision. The city sent an official letter to the Ho board requesting records of event approvals, permits, and safety plans. There were none. Karen had printed out a fake approval styled like a legitimate document, but it was missing key elements, signatures, QR codes, embossed seals. It wasn't just fraudulent looking, it was fraudulent. The city didn't say the word forged, but silence around the term was louder than any accusation. Inside the Hoa, panic bloomed. Carl, the Ho president, was nowhere to be found. His car hadn't moved since the party. Someone claimed to have seen him sneaking out through his backyard gate at dawn carrying a duffel bag. Karen called him repeatedly. No answer. His inbox was full. She tried to assert control anyway, attempting to call emergency meetings and send blanket emails defending herself. But the tone had changed. Even her allies were stepping back. Neighbors who once joined her for coffee now locked their doors when she approached. One family she personally recruited into the Hoa now posted in public thread calling for her resignation. It wasn't just about party tents anymore. It was about lies, endangerment, and the slow, horrifying realization that the woman everyone tolerated for years had nearly cost someone their life. And while Karen flailed in the public eye, Tanya became a reluctant beacon of accountability. News stations reached out. Journalists knocked. She refused interviews, but her footage continued to spread. The city's emergency oversight department formally requested access. Tanya obliged. They arrived. USB drives, clipboards, and solemn expressions. She offered them tea. A decline. Few nights later, second vehicle arrived. This time it bore the emblem of the state fire marshal's office. Out stepped a woman in dark gray slacks and mirrored sunglasses. Her presence was less theatrical than the fire chief's, but colder, more exact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Karen tried to intercept her on the sidewalk with a tray of leftover cupcakes from the party. The marshal didn't even glance at them. She handed Karen thick folder. Photos, maps, timestamps, violations circled in red. One showed generator placed directly against wood. Another showed fire pit beneath cloth canopy. Several depicted alcohol containers near underage guests. But the worst were the ones of the fire lane. Balloons tied to hydrants, tents anchored into pavement, folding tables blocking emergency signage. It wasn't partied, it was blueprint for negligence. Karen laughed nervously. She called it misunderstanding, miscommunication. The marshal raised an eyebrow. Who approved this event? She asked. Karen muttered something about Carl. Any documentation? The marshal pressed. Karen fumbled with her phone. Said she might have text, maybe an email. Please retrieve him, the marshal said flatly. Karen blinked. While she fumbled, small voice spoke up, girl. Maybe 10. Stepped forward. Are you here to make sure no one dies next time? She asked. The marshal knelt down. Yes, she replied. That's exactly why I'm here. Karen stood behind him, clutching her phone like it might burst into flames. For once she didn't speak, but the investigation wasn't over. Minutes after the marshal left, another vehicle arrived. This one belonged to the zoning department. Man emerged carrying rolled blueprints. He asked about temporary fence installed during the party. Karen nodded stiffly. Perimeter, she explained, for ambience. He frowned. Did you file for temporary structure permit? She said she didn't know it needed one. Anything over 4 feet blocking public right-of-way requires it, he said. Then he measured it 6 feet. Anchored into utility line. The silence that followed was surgical. The neighborhood, once ruled by Karen's overzealous order, began to turn. People whispered less and spoke more. Conversations that once occurred behind closed doors now happened on front lawns in group chats. Through patai meetings and late-night walks, Tanya, once the quiet neighbor, came symbol of standing up. Without shouting, she didn't gloat. She didn't accuse. She simply handed over the truth and let it speak. One afternoon, Karen tried one last move. Her lawyer sent Tanya cease and desist, claiming invasion of privacy, demanding that she take the footage down, but by then it was too late. The city had archived it. Emergency agencies had cataloged it. It was public record. Tanya forwarded the letter to the city's legal office. Their reply was swift and damning. In the event of public safety violations, visual documentation of an incident becomes property of public record under State Statute 42.12. Karen's threats, like her clipboard, had lost all weight. Her name trended, not with admiration, with mockery. She became case study. Meme warning, the fire lane she once blocked was now lined with cones and city signs. The Hobor finally stirred from apathy, called for full vote on her removal. And Tanya, she kept recording, not for drama, not for revenge, but because, for the first time, the neighborhood was watching with eyes wide open. The air had shifted. It wasn't supposed to be just the humidity or the distant smell of scorched hot dog buns that still lingered in some corners of the street. It was something deeper, like the silence that follows scream, like the pause between thunderclap and the first heavy drop of rain. Karen no longer strutted across the cul-de-sac with her clipboard. Her front yard, once obsessively decorated and immaculately preened, now looked frozen in time. Withered balloons clung to hedges like afterthoughts, and pile of folded chairs leaned haphazardly against her garage door. For women who had once turned even Hoa newsletters into subtle declarations of dominance, her absence was louder than any tantrum she'd ever thrown. Behind closed doors, things were unraveling faster than she could lie. 3 official investigations were now underway. City zoning, emergency oversight, and the state fire marshal's office had all open files. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in the form of whispers of questions she couldn't control, and a community no longer afraid to ask them. People began to talk, really talk, about past fines they'd quietly accepted, about the fake permits they'd assumed were real because she'd spoken so confidently. One man recalled being threatened with citation for planting pink petunias instead of Hora-approved marigolds. Another remembered being told he couldn't host Bart because it disrupted neighborhood aesthetic cohesion. They all started to wonder, How much of this had been real and how much had just been Karen? The Hoe, once a puppet stage with Karen pulling every string from behind the curtain, now sat in disarray. Carl, the ghost president, hadn't returned any calls. Rumor had it he was staying with cousin 2 towns over, lying low while legal letters piled up on his front porch. But leadership abhors vacuum, and in Carl's silence, new voice began to rise. Tanya didn't mean to be that, boys. She never wanted it. But when local news outlet knocked and asked she was the Tanya from the video, she didn't slam the door. She stood there nervous and composed and said, yes, but it's not about me. It's about what happened to Esther Green. That clip aired on the evening news, 37 seconds, calm, precise, devastating. It ended with Tanya saying, if we don't hold people accountable for blocking fire lane, we're saying some lives matter less than birthday decorations. That soundbite was shared thousands of times. Not for shock, but for truth. The following week, surprise audit announced the Hoe board, now down to 2 panic members and a half-dozen rotating substitutes, was required to hand over all financial documentation from the past year. This included discretionary spending, vendor payments, and event budgets. Karen, unsurprisingly, had kept the receipts. But the problem wasn't the lack of documentation. It was what the documentation revealed. She had used Hoe funds to rent the sound system, the inflatable castle, generator, and even to purchase customized party signage. Worse, the payments had been disguised as seasonal beautification and community engagement incentives. One item was listed as emergency readiness rental, which, bitterly ironic, had turned out to be bounce house anchored to fire hydrant. The financial officer resigned. Another board member went dark. Third posted cryptic message in the neighborhood forum that reads, we were all manipulated and I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. Beneath it, comment appeared from Tanya. It's not too late to start saying something now. That line, simple, firm, was screen captured and reposted across dozens of accountability groups. Tanya was now more than a neighbor with footage. She was a rallying point, a symbol. Karen, meanwhile, began to feel the walls close in. Children no longer rode their bikes past her house. Parents gave curt nods when she passed, but didn't stop to chat. Her social media accounts, once brimming with photos of brunches and inspirational quotes about community unity, were now locked behind privacy walls and riddled with deleted content. She made one attempt at controlling the narrative by holding clarity session in her driveway, term she'd printed on glossy flyers taped to neighborhood mailboxes. Only 3 people showed up, and 2 of them were reporters. The fire marshal returned for a follow-up site inspection. This time they brought a representative from the state attorney's office, not to arrest anyone yet, but to observe. Their quiet presence said everything. They didn't come to argue, they came to build case. Karen tried to offer an unprepared statement. They declined. Instead, they walked the block in silence, taking notes, pausing occasionally. Photographed cracked sidewalk where the temporary fence poles had been driven through city easements. That same evening, something unexpected happened. One of the guests from Madison's party, an older man Karen had introduced as her charming cousin from out of state, posted an open letter on local online forum. Turns out he wasn't just cousin, he was building inspector from another jurisdiction, and he had been horrified. In his post, he outlined every violation he had witnessed, from the improper use of extension cords to the unsecured propane heater next to the cotton candy machine. Described it as disaster waiting to happen. Only it didn't wait. He didn't name Karen, but he didn't have to. His letter ended with, when we ignore warnings and allow spectacle to override safety, we're gambling with lives. I couldn't stay silent knowing what almost happened. Karen tried to downplay it, said he was bitter about family dispute. But the neighborhood had stopped listening. Truth had new spokesperson, and it didn't wear glitter or carry clipboard. It wore quiet conviction and lived 3 houses down. In the days that followed, Tanya was approached by a representative from Regional Emergency Planning Agency. They were launching a campaign, Access Saves Lives, and they wanted to feature her footage as an educational tool. Tanya hesitated. She didn't want fame. She didn't want the weight. But she said yes, not for herself, but because she realized something terrifying. If she hadn't had that footage, if Esther Green had died, this would have been just another tragic fluke, buried under excuses and silence. But now it was case reckoning. Karen's lawyer sent another letter, this time not to Tanya, but to the city, threatening defamation claims and demanding that the footage not be used in promotional materials. The response from the city attorney's office was 2 sentences long. Public safety footage during an active emergency is not subject to suppression. Any further attempt to suppress documentation will be met with legal rebuttal. The power Karen had once wielded, the control, the fear, the manufactured authority, It evaporated, not with scream, but with quiet communal decision to stop pretending, to stop enabling. Her downfall wasn't theatrical, it was systematic. Day by day, the bricks of her self-made throne were removed, and it was her neighbors, the ones she controlled, intimidated, silenced, who took them apart one by one. By the end of the week, the yellow paint marking the fire lane was repainted by city workers. Bright, bold, fresh, above it a newly installed street sign read, "Emergency access only violations will be prosecuted." Tanya stood across the street watching them finish. She didn't smile, she didn't cheer, she just stood there, quiet, firm, and unblinking. And Karen, she watched from behind her blinds, as she always had, but this time no one was looking her way, because her reign was no longer feared. It was over. It began with the flyer taped to every mailbox on the street. No bold titles, no glitter, no branding, just simple black text on a white background that read, "Community safety drill this Saturday, 10 a.m. Attendance encouraged." At the bottom in smaller font it said, "Organized by HOA in coordination with City Fire Department." The words were neutral, but the subtext was scream. Karen's name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew what this was about. Everyone remembered. The flyer wasn't just an invitation. It was an exorcism. The neighborhood had shifted. It had once lived under Karen's tight grip, shaped by her arbitrary rules and weaponized charm. But now it was breathing differently, collectively, like body recovering from long illness. The whole board had been restructured after an emergency vote. Carl had officially resigned via email from an undisclosed location, attaching short paragraph claiming emotional exhaustion and irreparable reputational harm. 2 new board members were appointed. Retired fireman, the other logistics coordinator with no prior involvement in Ho politics. Their first act was to initiate full transparency. Financial records, safety plans, and open forums were now public. A monthly bulletin was published and delivered to each household, and unlike Karen's newsletters, it had no inspirational quotes or seasonal font choices, just facts, just progress. Karen didn't show her face. Her car remained parked unmoved. Her porch light stayed off. Her mailbox began to overflow. When people passed her house, stopped looking in, the silence around her was not out of fear. It was the silence and detachment of collective decision that her voice no longer mattered. The community had shifted from tolerance to disregard, and in the center of it all, without trying, Tanya had become a lighthouse. On the morning of the drill, the atmosphere felt strangely festive. Children wore plastic fire helmets. Adults sipped coffee on their lawns. A food truck parked at the corner offered complimentary water bottles and snack bars. A folding table had been set up with CPR dummies for demonstrations, and a large laminated map block showed emergency access zones now marked clearly in red. Tanya arrived early, not to organize, but to observe. She wore a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. No speeches, no clipboard. Just presence. The fire truck rolled in precisely at 10. The same model that had once been tangled in balloon strings and decorative archways now moved smoothly through the newly cleared lane. A fire chief stepped down from the passenger side and immediately began walking the path with one of the new board members. As they moved, he pointed at corners, made notes, nodded. At one point, he paused. A house that had installed reflective number signage. Good, he said out loud. Seconds matter. By 10:30, the street was quiet except for the community. People were listening, watching, learning, and then without prompt, the fire chief climbed onto the back of the truck. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't ask for attention. He just began speaking, and the street fell silent. "I've been to a lot of drills," he said. "Seen a lot of neighborhoods, but what happened here wasn't lack of training. It was lack of respect. For safety, for boundaries, and for human life that can't happen again." He looked across the crowd. No names, no accusations, just gravity. Fire lanes aren't optional. They're not for decoration. They're for survival. When you block one, even for a moment, you gamble with someone's heartbeat. And if you lose, you don't just bury neighbor, you bury trust. There were no applause, no cheering, just heavy silence, the kind that lands and stays. Children fidgeted, the adults nodded. Tanya watched from the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes steady. She wasn't waiting for thank you. She was waiting for the moment to land. And it did. As the crowd began to disperse, someone rolled out canvas banner. It was hand-painted clearly by a group of teenagers. It read, "Keep the lane clear. Save life." They clipped it to the community board near the mailbox cluster. The banner wasn't glamorous, it didn't shimmer, but people stopped. They took photos, and for the first time in years, message spread across the neighborhood that didn't have Karen's fingerprints on it. Later that day, Tanya received a call from local university. They wanted to use her footage in their safety curriculum, not just as warning, but as case study in civic responsibility. She agreed quietly. She didn't post about it. She didn't speak at the drill. But her impact was now institutional. Her doorbell footage, grainy, raw, powerful, had become part of the city's training archive. Karen, of course, tried to push back. Through her lawyers, she filed another cease and desist, this time alleging emotional distress, reputational damage, and unauthorized distribution of footage. But the footage was no longer just Tanya's. It belonged to the public record chain of events that had turned into policy discussions and training protocols. The city responded again, this time publicly, stating that all materials captured during a public emergency fall under state preservation statutes. The response ended with a brutal sentence. Suppression of civic evidence is disservice to public safety. With no legal traction, Karen's world continued to implode. Her husband had quietly moved out, citing irreconcilable public embarrassment in court document later leaked by reporter. Madison had to live with relatives, needing distance from the mess. School had become nightmare. She was now known as the girl whose birthday almost killed man, classmates whispered. Teachers paused when calling her name. One parent reportedly requested her removal from a group project, citing emotional disruption. Karen blamed everyone but herself. One afternoon, Tanya was walking her dog when she noticed something unusual. Karen was standing at the edge of her driveway holding a bag of trash. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked smaller, dimmer, as if the glitter that once kept her inflated had finally run out. Their eyes met. Didn't speak, she just held the bag motionless. Tanya gave small nod, acknowledgement, not forgiveness, and kept walking. By the following week, a petition had been circulated requesting Karen's removal from all HOA decision-making roles. It passed with over 200 signatures in 3 days. The board held vote. The result was unanimous. Karen was stripped of all official capacity. No public announcement, just printed memo taped beneath the community banner. The neighborhood, now free of her reign, began to bloom differently. People exchanged numbers. New parents were welcomed without suspicion. An elderly couple who had long been silent about Karen's past intimidation finally shared their stories. And Tanya, who had once been just another quiet house at the end of the lane, was offered an official role as community liaison. She declined. Instead, she recommended a rotating volunteer system. No more queens, she said, just neighbors. The fire chief returned one final time, not in uniform, but in polo shirt and jeans. He visited during the second fire drill, now quarterly event. He shook hands, gave small nods, and stood beside Banner. Child asked him, "Were you the guy who saved District Green?" He smiled. "No," he said. Mr. Green was saved by the seconds. We almost didn't get that evening. The neighborhood held small outdoor gathering. Not party, not spectacle. Just music, lemonade, and quiet conversation. Tanya brought her daughter. A few people thanked her. She nodded, offered soft smile, and said the same thing to each one. We just have to look out for each other. And above him, the banner fluttered. No terrorists, no tents, just purpose, just memory, just street. How to protect its own. The envelope arrived on Friday morning, thick, heavy, certified. Karen heard the knock at the door and waited 10 full seconds before opening it, as if delay might somehow erase what waited on the other side. The delivery man didn't smile. He handed her clipboard and asked for her signature with the flat tone of someone used to delivering bad news. Karen scribbled her name and accepted the package, clutching it like it might detonate. She closed the door softly, walked to her kitchen, and set it on the counter with trembling fingers, stood there for several minutes before finally tearing the seal. Inside were 3 separate lawsuits. The first from the Green family, citing obstruction, negligence, and emotional trauma due to delayed emergency care. The second was class action suit from over a dozen neighbors who alleged misappropriation of HOA funds and the illegal obstruction of public right-of-way. The third bore the insignia of the state fire marshal's office. It accused Karen personally of willful negligence, unauthorized use of municipal space, interference with emergency responders. It cited state fire code violations, including one clause with potential criminal penalties. Karen didn't scream. She didn't throw the papers. She just stared at them, as if the words might blur into something less damning if she stared hard enough. Her phone began to buzz, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. By now, the neighborhood had fully shifted from scandal to reckoning. What started as gossip had matured into quiet resolve. People weren't just angry anymore. They were focused on ensuring this never happened again. City Hall held press conference that same afternoon. The fire chief stood at podium and methodically outlined the timeline of the incident. He didn't say Karen's name, but the details were unmistakable. The blocked access, he said, delayed life-saving intervention by nearly 6 minutes. In cardiac event, 6 minutes can be the difference between survival and tragedy. Reporter asked if charges were being pursued. The fire chief paused, then said, while appropriate steps are being taken, it wasn't threat, it was promise. That weekend, national media picked up the story again. Segment titled, The Fire Lane Fiasco, aired on major news network, included doorbell footage, clips from the safety drill, and an interview with Esther Green's daughter. She looked directly into the camera and said, my father served his country. He survived combat zones, but he almost died in his own front yard because someone bayed balloons over breath. The anchor closed the segment by reporting that legislation was being drafted locally to increase penalties for obstructing emergency services in residential zones. They were calling it Karen's Law. Karen's name had become law, but not the way she'd ever dreamed. Not it into plaque or spoken with reverence, but as cautionary moniker meant to remind others what could happen when ego eclipsed empathy. She watched the segment from her living room, lights dimmed, curtains drawn. Her reflection in the TV screen was ghost-like, blurred by the flicker of her own downfall. Her social media had gone dark. Her email inbox was flooded with press inquiries, angry messages, and memes she didn't even understand. Her inbox label now read, Public Villain. Even the Hoa Facebook group she used to moderate had banned her. One of the moderators had posted a message that read simply, we protect community, not control it. Tuesday night, the Hoa board held an open meeting in the clubhouse. It was packed. More than 50 residents attended. People who had never once showed up before. Folding chairs were filled. People lined the walls. Tanya sat in the second row, silent but alert. The new president, middle-aged man named Raphael with background in logistics, opened the meeting with statement. This community has allowed power to be exercised without accountability for too long. That ends now. He then opened the floor to questions. They came rapid fire. Why weren't the permits verified? Who signed off on Hoa funds being used for private event? How do we make sure no one person can hijack the process again? Raphael answered each one methodically. When asked about Karen's role, he looked down at his notes and then said, Ms. Whitmore has been removed from all Hoa-related duties, effective immediately. There was no applause, just the collective exhale of neighborhood long held hostage by her will. It wasn't a moment of celebration. It was a moment of quiet release. Karen didn't attend. She sat in her car across the parking lot, engine off, watching people filter out afterward. No one looked toward her. A few walked past her car without noticing. One teen on a bike glanced her way and then looked away quickly. She sat there for nearly an hour before finally starting the engine and slowly driving home. The next day, a small sign appeared in her front window. No visitors, private property. It was taped crookedly. No one knocked. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. Not loudly, not in grand gestures, but in the small, practical ways that matter. People planted shared garden beds, neighbor installed public book drop, sidewalk chalk messages started appearing near the fire lane. Thank you, Esther Green. Keep it clear. Heroes need space. Tanya was invited to speak at local school civic education class. She brought the doorbell footage. Not the most clips, but the ones that showed what community looks like when it fails to speak up. One student asked her if she ever felt scared standing up. Tanya replied, yes, but silence didn't keep anyone safe either. Karen's house sat on the market for nearly 3 months. The listing avoided any mention of the incident, but everyone knew she eventually moved out one early morning before sunrise. Neighbor noticed moving truck and snapped blurry photo of her walking toward it in sweatpants, her head down. No forwarding address was left the house for below market value. The new owners, young couple with toddler, were welcomed with handmade cards, cupcakes, and printed copy of the neighborhood emergency contact list. The final twist came 1 month later. Tanya received knock at her door. Man introduced himself as representative from the state's Department of Public Preparedness. They were launching regional campaign about community responsibility and emergency access. He said they wanted to feature Tanya's story and asked if she would speak at conference in the Capitol. She hesitated. He said, sometimes the people who don't want the spotlight are the ones who shine the most when it matters. She accepted, not for the stage, but for the truth it carried. Karen tried one last time to erase her footprint. Her lawyer filed motion to suppress use of her name in the legislation. It was denied. The official record now permanently held her name. Karen's Law is a marker of what happens when personal entitlement endangers public welfare. With legacy was lessened. The neighborhood moved forward, not forgetting, but learning. And every time someone walked past the newly painted fire lane, they saw the words printed in bold letters beneath the curb. This space saves lives. They didn't think about the tiaras or the tents or the glitter. They thought about breath, about time, about the 6 minutes almost lost. And they remembered,